Welcome to Growing Up with AI, the podcast where I talk to people working in technology around what AI might mean for their kids. Today, I'm talking to Alex Harvey, the Chief Engineering Officer at Ocado Technology. Alex has over 20 years of experience of working with robots, software, and hardware. Alex, you've been working in technology for quite a while now, and I'm kind of curious, like when your kids first asked you what you do for a job, how do you explain what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Gabrielle, hi, and thank you very much for the very kind introduction and for inviting me to come and speak on your podcast. This is really exciting for me and for Ocado, and definitely a topic I'm quite passionate about. I think I'm quite lucky. So I have a couple of kids, and when I describe what I do, these days I tell them that I basically build robots and AI. So lots of cool toys, and my son is obviously very interested in technology and engineering. And so he understands that it is a very easy thing to describe to him. I show them videos. Right? Videos are always very impactful. And so they kind of understand that. And then previously, actually, before Ocado, I worked in aerospace, helping to develop gas turbines. And so, every time we sit on a plane, I talk to them about how the plane works. We go to the ducted aerodrome, which I enjoy, and we walk around the Trent engines, and I say how I've helped develop some of those as well. And so I always feel that being able to point at things is a great way of explaining what we do.
Yeah, and so you mentioned AI there. Kind of curious around, you've been in the space for 20 years, so you've been through the phases of when it used to be called data science or machine learning or big data or any of the other words we used to give it. So when you tell your 10-year-old or your 15-year-old children, I do AI, what does it mean? What does it mean for them, or how do you explain what it might mean for them?
Great question. I'm not sure they are as inquisitive maybe as they should be, and maybe I should push a little bit more. I mean, I think for them, and because of how much, they use digital devices these days, I think they just see AI as computers being really smart and intelligent. And so when I talk about the challenges for robotic picking, I describe that the reason we have to use AI is because if you wanted to be able to pick and pack the vast range of complex items that not only Ocado retail ranges, but also our international retailers like Kroger, Sobeys and Kohl's and Aeon in Japan and Lotte in South Korea, there are so much variability. And I tell them that if we were to program this using kind of standard routines and functions in the way that my son has programmed using Blockly and Python, that we would need an army of engineers to write specific if-then-else statements, in effect, for each of the different items. And I say, this isn't scalable. And so what AI does is a way of learning how to grasp these different items and how to understand. So the computer understands how to grasp the items of the robot and then what to do in error scenarios. And so I describe the capabilities of AI and how it's deployed, I think, rather than really kind of like the future and the fundamentals of AI.
So it feels like it's a bit of that definition of if it works, it's just software, everything else is AI, kind of that, we no longer really talk about AI in the context of search, for example, that stuff, because we've just gotten used to it and now it's just software.
Yeah. My son has done programming, has a reasonable background in this, and we've built things before using Mindstorms. Actually, back in the day, he was really interested in Rubik's Cubes. He had a friend at school that was like the Rain Man of Rubik's Cubes and could just solve them. I said, I can't do that, but I can build you a robot using Mindstorms and downloaded some C++ code that had the algorithm for how to unravel and then use the color sensor and, motors and drives. And we built all of that using some Blockly stuff and Lego Mindstorm. And so he's quite au fait with programming. And so understands the classical programming is deterministic.
Yeah.
You will execute the same function, it will do the same thing. But actually, in dealing with a world of variability, AI is a way of software systems and hardware systems being more intelligent by being able to be more adaptable without having to write specific codes to make them more adaptable.
And do you have any conversations with your kids around what the future of this technology might look like and how that might change their world and the upsides and possible downsides of where it might be going?
Yeah, so with my daughter less, Eleanor, she's only 10. So at the moment, I feel like that's a discussion maybe to happen in a couple of years. My son, Arthur, he's 15. And at the moment, he is just selecting, he's selected his GCSEs. And so he's one more year to go. He's doing his mocks. And we are now selecting, or he's basically selected his A-levels. But with all of this, it's kind of working back. And so we start with, hey, what do you think you want to do, when you grow up? That great question. When you're older, obviously he spent a lot of time with me. And so he has kind of like an engineering-y type interest. But actually, I always think it's so fascinating how kids for a period of time want to mimic and ape their parents, and then
then they do the opposite,
and then all of a sudden the individual thing kicks in and no, I want to be a bit different from you, Dad. And so actually he has a great love of cars and of design. And so we have ended up in wanting to do product design, but actually in those discussions, we've talked a lot about engineering. We talked a lot about the future of employment and
Yeah.
how AI is going to fundamentally change the future of employment. One, it's important that, he and I think all young people understand the potential of technology and are able to use the technology as a force multiplier. I think
Yeah.
it's really important to, you know, embrace it early and learn how to use it rather than sort of running away from it and hiding from it. And then obviously in as best as we can anticipate and predict, where there is creative and opportunity in roles, but that kind of like human aspect is likely to be very important in the future of employment, given the likely potential of AI and how much it will be able to do in so many roles. And so actually, when we were talking about engineering versus product design, we exactly debated this, that, we are sure that AI can design, I don't know, let's think of a bin.
Yeah.
But there are many bins on the market, and I do love my Joseph and Joseph bin, which has real product design, and whether or not that can be recreated with AI. And Arthur loves cars, and so the style of cars is less about function and is more
Yeah.
about kind of aesthetics and beauty, and how it really sort of stimulates us creatively and as people, right? Again, I love cars. And so in that aspect, we have certainly been discussing how the future of employment, if only because at the moment he is making these big life choices, right? I remember when I was young, or his age,
Yeah.
I guess certainly not young anymore. And you do try and sort of think about, like, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? Like, how am I going to contribute to society? How am I going to provide for myself and my family? And I think it's really important that one does think ahead. And so I have certainly been bringing in that perspective when we have been thinking about his future career, and then working back universities and working back A-level selection.
And so kind of what are the classes then that you feel would be benefiting him to bring that, that, let's call it taste, or the je ne sais quoi, right? Like there's this concept of taste in AI research, the idea of having the right ideas of what to go after. You talked about the taste in kind of the bin that just feels a bit different, that feels a bit more human, it feels a bit more less generic and kind of solves a problem in maybe an innovative in a kind of moment.
It's
Kind
like
of what do you
elegance
feel
or
like?
beauty as much as function, right? So
Yeah,
all bins form. This is a slightly weird example that I'm like squeezing every,
yeah,
drop out of. But cars, anything that we take that we work with, there are examples which function perfectly well, but do not
yeah.
provide the same sort of joy and
Yeah,
pleasure.
there's no emotional reaction, right? Like it's purely functional.
Exactly, exactly. And so I think that is really where, as best as one can predict today, roles that are able to influence and provide that kind of experiential joy are likely, I think, to still have a good involvement from people, significant involvement from humans in the future. Something that is very less creative and more process driven, I think is much more up for being automated ultimately.
And so when you have this conversation with your son, like what's the worldview that you're building together around like how like he's now 15, so it's about 5 years until he's going to leave home. What do you expect the world to look like when he ends up leaving home? And kind of how do you think about artificial general intelligence in this context? Or is this something where you say, actually, you know what, it really doesn't matter for those questions?
I mean, I think for me, I want him to enjoy his childhood. So that there is definitely a limit to how much I kind of talk about slightly dystopian futures, because I don't think I want to depress him too much at the moment. I kind of feel like we're still at a point of wanting to inspire, and so that he goes out into the world excited and passionate and hope. But it is a worry, right? And so when we have these discussions, certainly they are part of the things that influence the feedback and the insights and advice that I give him
Yeah.
about which subjects to take, encouraging to use these tools. He's pretty au fait with ChatGPT. He does an awful lot with his computer. And so I certainly encourage him in these spaces. But I think, my parenting style, I think, is more about showing opportunities rather than like hardcore pushing and helicopter parenting.
Yeah.
My ex-wife, we're divorced for 7 years, but she is German and went to a hippie school in Germany where, if you want to work, if you want to play. But she is now a very successful person in tech as well. And so it's like a very different cultural approach to, let's say, a more kind of top-down helicopter parent where like we're going to push. For me, it is more about having him find his own way and trying to guide him in finding his own way, using all the knowledge and world awareness that I have so that to help him make good choices.
Obviously, you and I, we live in a world where kind of there's a lot of conversation on AI and the impact it has on the products we build and kind of how we build those products. Does it ever happen to you that he comes back and he's read an article or he's had a conversation with friends and suddenly he asks you a question? There's kind of a deep one around like, what does that mean for me and how will I, what should I be doing on? Or is it kind of more that you feel because you're living in this world, it's more of a conversation that you're pushing onto him instead?
Yeah, I think I push this onto him a little bit more. So I think, again, his awareness of AI in a kind of a deep is not, it is there as he is aware of it and, the positive upsides of it, right? And how I work with it using robots. And he understands that obviously AI helps the robots figure out how to pick the different items and how to place them in a way that we don't need to keep writing many, many different control sequences. But I think, he's a 15-year-old boy. He loves playing computer games. He still actually does an awful lot with Lego and he's very creative with that. And so he loves design. And if I'm honest, he uses some of these tools occasionally to cheat in his homework, like I suspect most kids do, or at least to amplify his ability to complete homework on time.
I mean, it's an interesting question, right? Like, is it cheating or is it just the same way as Wikipedia used to be used by us when we were at that age and you couldn't really source it, but actually, to be honest, it was often a very good source of information.
Yeah. And so I use those opportunities. I'm like, okay, if you want to use ChatGPT, this is good, but you should rewrite it. And like,
Yeah.
what have you learned? Right. So I kind of
Test
feel,
whether it's true and kind of
yeah,
validate.
exactly. I think I use those opportunities as kind of like, rather than sitting them down, having like a birds and the bees discussion for the future of AI, it's more like, as there are opportunities that come up,
Yeah.
make sure that I give him the best insights that I possibly can.
So I guess like to a certain extent, maybe we can see ahead a little bit for the next 5 years. Right? Like it's questionable given if there is the exponential increase in the capability. Like your daughter has another 10 years before she needs to make some of those choices. So how you approach that differently in that context? So it's almost like you say, look, it's hard enough to predict within the time for my son, and actually we'll learn enough through there. So we'll somehow work out in that space. Or do you think about it differently in her context?
I think so. Again, no worry. I just sound like a neglectful parent probably, but I think she's still too early to kind of really know what she wants to do. At least if I speak to her today, she would say that she loves writing and so would like to be a writer. That feels like, I appreciate there's quite a lot of creative opportunity in there, but that definitely feels like one which will be more challenging. And she loves animals. I mean, like just loves having pets. She spends time creating these different face masks of animals that she's watched on YouTube and learned how to create cat masks and fox masks. And they're kind of basically from cosplay, but she creates them, spends hours creating them, and actually has found that you can sell them on eBay. And so has then asked me to go and sell the face masks that she creates. We created like a whole business plan. So she's quite entrepreneurial in this way, but whether, in the next 5 years, these are still her passion, or whether a little bit like with Arthur, I would say that 5 years ago, he was like, no, Daddy, I want to be like you. I want to be an engineer. It was still very much in the, I would say hardcore engineering, like building things. I think now he's very much in the, no, I quite like the domain, but I don't want to be the building person. I want to be the person creating the design concept and then having somebody else build that. So he just wants to have enough appreciation of how to build that he can create viable designs. It was quite reported on the news recently, the rebranding and launch of Jaguar Land Rover.
Yeah.
And the approach that their product design team took and whether or not that was really the right approach. And so he's clearly adjusted his perspective over time. And I feel that my daughter may well adjust her perspective over time. And so I think as she grows and develops and her perspectives either change or cement, then I think, again, providing that advice in like an incremental and tactical way. But I definitely want them to feel positive. I feel actually like, and somewhat tragically in my family, I have a couple of brothers who really suffer with mental ill health. And actually, I think it is as important as anything. A very important factor is how one sees the world, right? Whether you are a positive person, you have enough resilience that as challenges come up, you don't let those challenges impact you too much, right? And you can recover and keep going. So for me, I think I am very focused in making sure that they have that resilience and determination and interest in the world and curiosity, rather than trying to stamp it out or provide like a really predetermined path for them. Like, you are going to do this and then you are going to do this. Again, from my background, I think this works much less well. If I think about all the things that my parents wanted me to do, I was like, hell no, I'm going to go do something differently. And so I Yes, I think it is my job is to kind of provide guardrails and to nudge them back a little bit rather than to give them the map.
I quite like this focus on saying, look, they're kids now, they're kids once, and actually, therefore, the most important thing is for them to be happy, because then they come out as confident humans, and confident humans find a way of adapting to whatever change. And given that it's hard to predict next 3 years, it's borderline impossible to predict the next 10 years. Do you have a view around some of those changes so that you think are very likely going to happen? And particularly around, like, at the moment, there's a lot of discussion around AI in the context of software, but we're seeing more in the world that you live in, very closely in the embedded systems. You've worked on robotic pick. You've kind of led all of the collaboration around autonomous driving. And there's a lot of exciting stuff, right, that's happening in the worlds of the waves and stuff like that out there. And is there certain things where you have very strong beliefs around, like, actually, this is potentially, or this is very likely going to come out as a scenario here around where that is developing and how far it might get us?
Question in two different ways. Right. I think with my kids, I think being natively digital, I think is key. And so
What does
again,
that mean? Kind of natively digital in your household, kind of?
yeah, basically we have very few restrictions on devices, which I know is probably, again, not the cool thing to say as a parent. I feel like typically parents in tech tend to be the most restrictive of their kids. I have some other friends in tech and chat, and I feel there are definitely some groups and companies where it's like, no, we're going to ban our kids from devices until like they are 18 years old. As I say, my daughter self-regulates because she doesn't see it as something where there's a restriction. And so she just uses it as part of play. And so it's really interesting. She'll watch these YouTubers and YouTube videos, and she like loves animals. And so she discovered somehow these like how to make these cat masks, and incredible.
Yeah.
And then comes down is like, Dad, can we go and buy a glue gun and buy all this stuff? And then she spends hours and hours and hours making them. And so rather than it being something which she just is glued to all day long, I mean, she does spend probably too much time on it, but it inspires her. And then she uses what she has learned or discovered and then applies that in the real world. My son, again, does far too much gaming, like probably every boy I know that I did when I was young. But I mean,
Yeah.
he plays computer games on his gaming laptop, if we say something like Forza or, GTA, and can watch TV with us and
Yeah.
speak to his friends at the same time. So I watch him playing GTA and he's like controlling the car correctly, like he's not falling off, and he's watching the TV. So I can ask him questions about what we're watching and he can answer questions. So his ability to process multiple streams of information concurrently and actually process them rather than like fast switching is not something that I possess. I saw my daughter years and years ago pinch zoom in a book, right? Because
Yeah.
she was so used to being able to pinch zoom on a tablet that like she got a book and started trying to pinch zoom and like, why doesn't this pinch zoom? So for me, and they obviously play computer games, and the computer games have got characters that are all AI based. And so for me, I think being very confident with technology, but not feeling that it rules their life. And
Yeah.
so I guess for me, it's not about the device, it's about social media. And so there is basically like a social media ban. And happily, I've never been into it myself.
And just what do you define as social media? I guess like some people would say YouTube is social media in some shape or form. It kind of
Yeah,
is that
I
for
think,
you
I think
most
something where
Instagrams.
you are sharing your own stories, right?
Okay, so it's the generation of it rather than the consumption of it that you're
Yes.
kind of worried about. Okay.
Yeah, because I think then you get into these like chat rooms and all sorts of like, my daughter lost her phone 6 weeks ago, and me and her mum are very frustrated because we want to find it, because there are times where it's quite useful to call her, have you remembered your house key? But my daughter does not care. She literally could not be bothered, which is for me actually one of the best things, because it does give me some degree of confidence that she's not chatting to people. And one of her friends recently did get approached and did naively were like, oh, hi, reply to a hi, and then started this whole conversation. And clearly it was somebody being very, very dodgy. Now the
Yeah.
mum spotted it, but like this is, I think, where obviously parents should be very aware. And for me, it's a terrifying scenario.
Yeah.
And so that, I think, is kind of for me in terms of making sure that they have access and feel comfortable with these tools, but how we manage it. Now, in terms of what I think the potential is for this technology in the next 5 years, and I mean, I think even just the term AI, it's been, lots of people will talk about it being overhyped, and I think it has both been overhyped and underhyped. And, when I was coming out of university and first playing around with neural networks, like their capability was very, very limited, lots of handcrafting feature detectors. But today it is phenomenal. And even when we started at Ocado attempting to do the sort of robotic picking, we started with a very different architecture that was a much more classic architecture, using kind of biasing with software paradigms, and so perception systems are separate to kind of control systems. But today, as I know you're aware, but Ocado have rolled out over 150 robotic pick arms. There'll be 500 by the end of this year, and it's using end-to-end behavior cloning, pre-trained, video stream to action with no code.
Yeah.
And it is incredible how it generalizes, how capable it is. Watching the videos of it pick and pack are really phenomenal. And so when it comes to the kind of the intersection of AI and hardware, I think we will see robotic picking is a great use case because the robot is in effect bolted to the ground. There are very few kind of safety issues in terms of the regulatory environment.
Yeah, it doesn't interact with humans within
Exactly.
space.
Autonomous vehicles, when you look at some of the technology in Wave and Oxa, have some, great systems, and Wave as well is an end-to-end behavior cloning type system. Its driving performance is phenomenal, and it is so good. But the regulatory environment is so challenging that it's more of a regulatory challenge and how you gain confidence
Yeah.
in the system. When we deploy robotic picking, it's not perfect. Okay. And so we augment the robotic picking system, the autonomous picking system, with humans. And so you have human in the loop, so that if the robot is unable to complete the pick or drops an item or has some error, then remote pilots are able to assist the robot and augment its autonomy so that the robot is able to keep going. And so even in this instance, we have this kind of force multiplier effect where traditionally, and before we deployed OGRP, picking, humans were doing the picking, over extended shifts. And so now we deploy the robotic pick arms. There are still humans involved, the remote pilots, but there are far fewer of them. And obviously the autonomy in the robot is doing the vast majority of the work. We now pick over 99.9%, I think, autonomously. But there is still human in the loop. And I think getting to that point where the AI doesn't need human in the loop it's a long tail. And so it achieves really great capability very quickly, but to kind of like 50, 60%. But
So your view is more that this is less of an exponential thing where it gets better and better because it can kind of train itself, but it's more something that's asymptotic than kind of where the 80/20 rule is easier to.
at the moment, right, at the moment, the way that we've been building systems and investing, at the moment, it looks like an 80/20 rule. But at the point that, I know there's a discussion, can AI do AI research?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, a lot of money going into that at the moment, right?
yeah, yeah.
Especially by the big frontier labs.
And, we've moved from different underlying architectures, from CNNs to transformers and then policies. It definitely feels like there will be a point where all the great work that we've done in robotic picking, there may be AGI which is available that is able to do all of it out of the box, right? And fundamentally, I guess a foundational model offers much of these opportunities, but how you can deploy them effectively at the edge, because obviously at the edge, you've only got a limited amount of compute. And so when it comes to something like an LLM or a transformer model, that is not efficient to deploy on low compute. And you need the reaction to the sensory feedback from the robot system, even just the amount of bandwidth required. If we were processing all of this in the cloud, like video streams at 50 hertz from 4K cameras from hundreds of robot arms, would swamp.
Yeah, and there's like 3 cameras on every single arm as well, right? So it's
Yeah.
not just a single camera.
So I think there will absolutely come a point where there is a level of AI capability that is so generalized in its capability that it will be able to do just many, many jobs, right? I don't think robotics is a manifest embodiment of AI. Robots are really not useful until we have that level of capability in AI. You can use
Yeah.
robots in point systems, and we'll talk about robots in a fixed automation way. Our bots are robots, but they're still deterministic systems. The idea of having a humanoid robot that can really effectively offer, help from an assisted living perspective, or robots that can go and help from an agricultural perspective, like these will come. And I think in a 5 to 10 year period, again, it will be about people's assurance and happiness and confidence, and the reliability of the system, I think, will be the kind of the key challenge. But I think there's no doubt that as we see how even our robotic pick system has progressed in the last 10 years, the technology is accelerating at such a rate that our system gets better and better just by the advancement of a more capable AI. And actually, if we had tried to roll this out at scale 5 or 10 years ago, it just wouldn't have been as effective, right? We would have needed many more human pilots, many more error
Yeah.
cases. It would have been a much more complicated system.
I think the other thing that I think is very interesting around the new system in which robotic pick works is that it was originally developed by a fairly small team, right? As a kind of almost a challenger to the existing
Yep.
one. And I think therefore kind of that, what's the starting up cost, or how complex is it to build something? Again, right, like they're a smart team that had access to a lot of the data, and therefore that would have not been that easy if you had been sitting outside of the Ocado organization. I'm curious around how you see that stuff then change the way that you think about building software, hardware, and around like what is the competitive advantage if, you know, it is now possible by, I think it was a team of 3-4 people right at the beginning that got us very far with this, to the extent that it was more performant than the much bigger team working on the other system. Because there was this paradigm shift around how to think about the problem and kind of no longer breaking it down into individual parts that all had to be tuned and developed individually and then had to be coordinated. But suddenly you just said, okay, AI, help me understand this end to end and kind of do sensing and motion, and I'll let you kind of optimize that whole function. Do you feel like that's a general pattern that will then apply to more things? Like, you know, Wave obviously is the other example of kind of a company that decided to do it this way rather than the way that some other companies have done it, which was a bit more like breaking it down into different scenarios. And
yes, it's not a very helpful answer for you, but yeah, I think this.
how does that change the way that you think about software development, or kind of now in your new role? What is the bits that are competitively protectable versus what's the stuff where actually maybe we need to be a bit more?
Clearly, access to data is key. So with these systems, and certainly where foundational models are today, really having access to real world data is absolutely key. Like, we've tested stuff in the labs and it always looks great in the lab, but until you are picking millions and millions of items a week and seeing those kind of low probability events, but when you're picking millions and millions of things, you start seeing the 1 in a million quite regularly, and then building and adapting and improving the AI to be able to handle those events. You know, in the team that built the machine learning, it is staffed significantly with people who are robot pilots. We call them expert pilots, right? So they are next level. But funny enough, coming back, right, to my son, and basically the people who are best at being the robot pilots, the expert pilots that give us the best training data, they are really gamers.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when I was growing up, my mum would be like, Alex, you're spending time on computers and your console. This is not helping you in the future. But actually, it turns out that for a whole bunch of people now, all the time spent on consoles and computers playing games, interacting with a 3D world using a 2D screen where you use your hands to manipulate some sort of input device so that your system is working, is exactly what we need.
Yeah, and I think kind of this, in a way, this circles quite nicely back to the thing around like, do you expose your kids to digital devices or not, right? Because the argument by those people in tech who don't want that is because it reshapes your brain at the time when your brain is very shapeable, especially during puberty, and kind of some of that might not be natural, right? Like, for whatever definition of natural, but actually maybe it is the thing that in the new world that we live in gives you that edge over others who haven't spent quite as much time kind of tuning those skills in a time when it's easier to learn.
Yeah, it's like, and specifically in this instance, right, it is, I again imagine it's about like having a mental spatial model, and that you as a human can work through your own, you know, physical, but translating that into the kind of the digital representation. So if we think about robotic pick and the pilots use Vive controllers, you know, from HTC or from any kind of like VR system. But if you want the robot arm to go down perpendicularly, that is quite a complex physical arm movement of the robot pilot. And so you need to have the, you know, the Vive doing a downward motion, right, perpendicular to the world, which requires you as a human to have a very complex set of joint interactions from your wrist, your elbow, and your shoulder. And when we've had people come around, we've had CEOs of different companies that Ocado provides these systems to, and, you know, we have some labs and we're like, right, do you want to have a go? Being a pilot is really interesting how bad so many people are. And even just understanding that to go down, it's the Vive controller which needs to go down in a linear sort of vertical manner, not their arm. And so they tend to swing their arm from their elbow, and the robot does all sorts of crazy maneuvers.
Yeah.
And kind of this translation between the human frame of reference and the robot's frame of reference is actually is a example of mental elasticity that I think you get by playing a bunch of computer games. You know, we have, you know, binocular vision, and so, you know, in the real world we learn about depth and how as humans we interact with it. But ask a person to control a real robotic system that has hardware, only using a 2D TV screen from a camera, and we say, please don't break the robot and please don't damage everybody's groceries. So it's a really interesting challenge, but people figure it out, right? And this also comes back to how the AI then figures it out. There comes
I think there's something really interesting in what you're saying there is around like, we train the AI, but the AI just as much trains us. Or kind of in this context, not the AI, but the kind of the 3D system. And kind of coming back to this, actually, in certain parts of your life, especially if you're younger, you're more malleable and it's easier to pick up new skills, right? It's easier to learn a new language. It's easier to kind of change your worldview because your neurons aren't yet so fixed, right? And there's a lot of similarity here within the AI learning and the brain learning. And so it's interesting around like, therefore, giving your kids exposure to that stuff earlier on kind of sets them up in a specific pattern, right? That kind of then maybe allows them to take advantage of that knowledge or that pattern later down the line.
Yeah. But predicting is hard, which is
Yeah, exactly.
like,
What
this is the
patterns are those
nightmare as
patterns
a
that will
parent.
survive? Yeah.
What are those things that are positive and what are those things that are going to be less positive is uh, sadly not something I can A/B test.
Yeah.
And then my heart goes out to every parent when faced with these impossible set of decisions. We have our experiences growing up, but I don't know how well the experiences that we all have had growing up really will work as part of a forward projection predicting the future. That's all we ever do as people, right? Is you use our own experiences and then you project based on those experiences what you think. But like, it's so heavily biased based on our experiences.
Do you think kind of our age that we live in now, kind of the age of our kids, is quite unique in that sense? So kind of I was reflecting, I was growing up when the internet came around, but probably kind of that was a fairly optimistic worldview, right? Like the Cold War had just ended. It was generally everyone was quite in a happy space versus now the conversation is, let's call it more nuanced. And I'm definitely having more conversations around the concerns as much as the opportunities. Do you think that's kind of something that's quite unique around our time, or is that unique around the technology, or kind of how does AI here differ with regards to, the mobile phone coming around or some of the other things that we've seen in the past?
Yes, good question. I think there's definitely something different in the rate of change.
As in it's significantly faster.
Yes, there is a significant acceleration. Let's call it even an exponential acceleration in the rate of change.
Yeah.
And I think that makes it hard for people just in general. I think,
Yeah, exponential is something that is hard to wrap your head around, right? Like, because I think kind of people tend to think linearly, but what does it mean if something doubles every X amount of months or years or whatever in capability? It's very hard to understand that.
and if I look back from my parents, even to my grandpa, and the sort of the progression of the world that they lived in, as you say, advancements in things like having television, then mobile telephones, and then the laptop and the computer, and ultimately there were adaptations on things that existed already, right? So obviously people had a typewriter, and then you moved to a laptop, and the first laptop was pretty terrible. Some
Yeah.
people quite like the typewriter, but ultimately the capability of the laptop improved, and no one uses a typewriter these days. Similarly, people had been used to different forms of communication, ultimately like sending letters, and then a telephone and a telegram, and so a mobile phone feels like, again, a very cool innovative step, but one which I think if you grew up, you were born in the 50s, it still feels comprehensible. And so as we were going through the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, I think whilst my parents are definitely not very digitally savvy, to the point that I'll just tell my dad, go and press this button, press that button, or they phone me up, Alex, the internet's broken, like the classic, where it's like, it's not the internet, I think it's your Wi-Fi, but like,
Turn it on and off again.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
But from where our kids are growing up now, yeah, they are at a point in time where I think anybody's ability to predict, and I come back to, and for me, like one of the greatest sort of indications of the inflection point that we are in at the moment, the fact that we have awarded or Nobel prizes to areas of AI, right? And the one for Demis Hassabis and AlphaFold 2 is just incredible.
Yeah. And then Jeff Hinton being the second one, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly, right? I mean, this is a real change. And I think, when we think about the future, we think about the future constrained in, again, our frame of reference. And so I think, and in sort of thinking about this before our call, there is a lot of worry about the future, because I think if you think about the future based on what we know today, like, I know the jobs that I have today and the opportunities that I have today, and so, oh my gosh, how automatable are these?
Yeah.
What if AI were to discover a method of transportation for faster than light? Like, I just think it, and
Yeah.
I'm not saying this is even physically possible, but it could discover stuff which opens up opportunities that we just can't even imagine.
Yeah.
And I don't want to sound too much like Elon Musk here in terms of space travel and humanity going out into the universe, but genuinely, we don't consider that as part of a viable future because it's just beyond our ability to imagine when that's a real thing.
So it's like, what constraints can it take away that we currently live in, and how does that change, therefore, the questions we might ask ourselves? Are
Exactly.
you kind of an avid reader of science fiction?
Yeah.
Because like, there's an argument to be made, right? Like the science fiction writers are sometimes the best in not necessarily predicting what might happen, but predicting like assuming a scenario will happen, giving you different ways of how that scenario might play out, and both on the utopian side, but also on the fairly dystopian side as well.
Yes, I'm afraid, like, as is probably very evident for all of us, I love science fiction, technology, and I'm a dyslexic, so I wouldn't say I'm an avid reader of anything. I do say I'm an avid consumer
Yeah.
of stories and books in various different ways. I like listening to quite a lot of podcasts.
And get curious around like bring some of these together around like has that changed the way that you think about like certain decisions with your kids around the schools you send them to? There was recently a interesting study, the first part of it from the Alan Turing Institute came out, and it showed that usage of LLMs and generative AI is significantly higher in private schools than it is in state schools in the UK, for example. So kind of does that change how you think about the schools you send your kids to, or kind of maybe what trips you make with them, or kind of or the gifts you give them around like coming back to this, like giving them a chance to mal their brain
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
in a more digital space, but also kind of letting them be kids and enjoying their childhood while they are kids.
Lots of good questions. In terms of schools, yes. I guess like most parents, one's a bit constrained by where one lives.
Yeah,
Unless one, like you, is brave enough to relocate your family. But we're very lucky. There is a very good academy in the catchment area. And so it is not a private school in that we pay, but it is a very modern academy that has embraced digital technology. And so, everything is done through iPads. I suspect there are different perspectives about this, of whether it's better. My mum was a teacher. I think my mum would be like, no, everything should be with books. And we love my mum. And her house is like stuffed with books. In fact, for her, like books are like the currency of life. But I'm very glad that they are in a school, and Ellen will go, I'm sure, to the same school, which are very embracing of digital technologies. Because I think it's hard, because when you come back to this exponential acceleration, like we, who are, let's say, domain experts in the field, find it hard to predict.
yeah, it's even hard to keep up at times, right? There's so much stuff being, and
Exactly.
then there's
And
how
I've
do you
still
know
got,
what is true
luckily,
versus
a reasonable period of time left in my productive employment lifestyle before I retire. And for teachers who are teaching today, if they grew up like me in the 1980s, they certainly won't have had a background in this. And so I think it is very, very tough in
yeah.
that area. And so I spend, that is why when it comes to things like gifts, I know it sounds incredibly like gender biased and reinforcing, but again, because my son, I guess, just wanted to ape me, lots of Lego, building these things out of Mindstorms. He had at one point a couple of years ago the Land Rover Defender, built it on Christmas Day with its high and low range 4-wheel drive gearbox, built it. 10 minutes later, started stripping it all out and then installing it with Mindstorms and motors so that he could have it drive around all top, and he just makes this up as he goes along. And so I think these sorts of gifts are great as a way of kind of inspiring. And then actually we do a lot with experience gifts. So rather than a birthday present, it is a birthday experience.
Yeah.
And again, I feel kind of experiences, are something which we can have, like humans with dopamine. Like the whole point is we can experience stuff in a way that I don't think AI can. And so actually, not at the moment. And so I think, again, ensuring that they, maximize the opportunities of being a human, I think.
I think that's really such a powerful statement. I think Mark Cuban recently came out as well of the Shark Tank in the US that he's doubling down on investments into event companies and stuff like that. Because in a world of AI, the thing that makes us human is that human connection. And actually brands who will be having more of that human connection or that human feeling to it will come out much stronger. I'm sure that kind of, given the role that you have and your experience in this space, other parents must be asking you questions around what does that mean? What does that mean for our kids? So kind of what is the thing that you think every parent should be doing at home to get their kids ready for this brave new world?
And I do have lots of discussions. I do feel I have to censor myself a reasonable amount because I feel my approach to being free with devices is not the cool parenting philosophy at the moment. And so actually I tend to sort of censor myself a little bit in those forums, if only because I feel like otherwise I end up being criticized quite heavily. But for me, this is, maybe I will be proven badly wrong. And the experiment with my kids, as I said, I go back to whether I'm a neglectful parent. But I take a lot from my childhood, actually, where my parents worked in a similar way. They were very supportive. I was doing things as a young teenager, going places. My mum would kick me out of the house in the nicest possible way. She'd be like, Alex, you need to go and entertain yourself for the rest of the day, come back at supper time. And so actually I found that kind of personal freedom and self-reliance a really valuable thing. Before going to university, I was lucky enough to go crewing on sailboats for about a year, which again was great in terms of, you had to cook yourself, maintain things, work with people that you've never met before, I think. And so when it comes to other parents, I'm divorced, I have a partner, she has a different approach, let's say, when it comes to kids and devices, but this is definitely a bone of contention for us, right? And the kids recognize that it's different. And so actually it's not very easy. My advice in general would be to embrace the modern world.
I also get a feeling like out of what you're saying is put trust into the kids that they will be reasonable. because the important bit is that they can trust themselves around their actions. Again, building that confidence bit, right? You are human, you will always be. That gives you certain edge over machines in certain cases, but you need to trust yourself that have an edge or that you have something to contribute and bring.
Yes. And it's kind of feels sometimes like a bit of a high wire act because with that trust, obviously one wants to verify and make sure that they are not engaging with, nefarious people online in a way that they shouldn't. And so I think the establishment of trust, and I think you have summarized it perfectly. It is iterative. It takes time. You have to build up layers of trust and strata.
Yeah.
My son, a couple of years ago, said one day he wanted to go and visit Granny. Granny lives like 3.5 or 4 hours away. Probably he has to go from Cambridge, so he has to go from a train into London, a couple of tubes across London, get on some more trains, and he did it all on his own. I didn't track him. There's no like devices being tracked or air tags. Handed him some money. I told him good luck. I gave him a quick verbal, you're going to have to get a few trains. There's an underground map. Do you know what you're doing? Yes, Dad, I can do this. I call my mum, Granny, can you just let me know when he gets there? She's like, will do. And he got there fine. And
Yeah.
now it has given him so much confidence to move around. Thought, Dad, I want to go into Cambridge. I'm going to get a bus. I'm going to do all these things. And for me, it's great as a parent, being a kid who feels so confident and is able to do these things without needing lots of support. I kind of actually feel
Yeah,
I should
especially in
be
an uncertain future, right? Like
feeling
where
a success.
you can't predict it better than them, and you need them to be able to react to whatever, I guess, like life and technology throws at them.
And so we don't know what future's going to bring, but he's very relaxed about stuff. And actually, again, I quite like this, that he's sufficiently relaxed. He's like, yeah, Dad, we'll figure it all out, rather than
Yeah,
like panicking. Because I do think panicking and anxiety just consumes so much like cycle time that you're then not able to think creatively and rationally because you're always worrying about loss rather
yeah.
than opportunity. And I think framing things as opportunity is,
Yeah, if you're in a defensive state of mind, you will have a defensive attitude, and therefore you kind of protect what you already have rather than being able to see what you might be able to
and
gain.
you'll never be able to protect it perfectly, right? It will
Yeah.
always like ebb away. It will get chipped away over time and it will feel bad, which is why I keep come back to this. It is an opportunity. It is uncertain, but one is much more likely to be successful by embracing and having a go and figuring it out and trying to avoid it and run away. But at the same
And
time,
then
part of my reason for working as hard and being successful is like I would like to give my kids as much financial security for a very uncertain future. But I'm
just
sure
again,
many other people in this industry have a similar perspective because like again wanting to be a responsible parent, I want to give them the best opportunity, but I want them to have a safety net. And I feel like I can do some of that.
and then maybe just one last one, given that you were talking about the opportunity there already anyway. In 10 years, what is AI going to automate to allow you to spend more time with your kids?
Most like I'm not going to answer your question properly, but in a different way. He spent a lot of time with my grandpa when I was at university in Edinburgh because he lived in Edinburgh and he actually worked in Bletchley during the war. Very proud of this. Anyway, he was getting very old. He was like super clever, brain 100% up until the point he died. He spoke 5 languages. He was a turnaround practitioner, but physically he deteriorated quite significantly in elder age, suffered terribly from like psoriasis to the point that ultimately the doctor said, and actually what killed him was blood infection. The doctor said, really, you're going to have to get your legs amputated. He was like, I'm not having my legs amputated. And he was lucky enough because he had worked that he was able to employ a nurse to come in 4 or 5 times a day and to dress his bandages. And so the quality of life this gave him by being independent rather than being in a nursing home just made all the difference. And he was lucky because he could afford a nurse to come in a few times a day and to dress his wounds, but most people can't. And so for me, in 10 years, what do I hope? I hope that actually like we do democratize this kind of capability, that we do solve some of the tough challenges that we face as society today, things like scaling and funding the NHS through technology that not only improve society, but as in, we all, certainly anyone in the UK at the moment, with some of the challenges that we face, I think, in terms of government funding and how we fund things like the NHS and defence, it give individuals in society a better quality of life through things like assisted living and will help society overall in how we manage our scarce resources, again, such as, doctors and nurses in the NHS using things like robots for assisted living. And so I think it will, for me, I am definitely a positive person. It will help free us up to be able to do many more things and to live more full lives.
Thank you so much, Alex. This was a super fascinating conversation.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Thank you.